Okay, so what day is today? Oh no, it's Tuesday, like it always is. Jacob, you want to do the news,
Okay,
or do you want me to go? I don't care.
I can, I don't care
I
either,
know.
but I
Go for
guess. Okay,
Make me uncomfortable.
I'll do the news. I gotta get
You
used
gotta,
to talking
you gotta
to
be,
people.
you gotta do your co-chair.
Okay, I got to do my stuff.
I mean, is it the flesh skin from the phone?
No, thankfully that's all behind us.
Yeah.
So it looks like China is going to be regulating how much Skyrim people can play.
Wow.
Um,
To the surprise of absolutely nobody.
yeah, no video games between the hours of 10 p.m. and 8 a.m.
Oh, wow.
Only 90 minutes of game time per day, except national holidays, where you're allowed a maximum of 3 hours.
How do you even
More
micromanage
than
that?
that, less. How are they gonna monitor this?
I think it's online games that they're mainly focused on.
Oh, okay.
And people will have to register their screen names as their legal names. And
Man.
yeah, these are the
Yeah.
and
This is crazy.
let's see, there's
So,
other stuff in here.
like, if you want to get like your country to just be the smartest people everywhere, just make them do absolutely nothing but learn. I guess.
Yeah,
True.
It's crazy. I saw this one. It was crazy.
it's like they're targeting loot crates though, so yeah, not all bad. But yeah.
So we can see that President Putin is clearly alive and well.
No, this is China.
Who, as in like Xi,
Oh, I thought you said Putin.
Xi Jinping.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So that's happening. GitHub is celebrating the 40 million member mark, and there's also some neat stats in this article about which languages are popular at the moment. So as we can see here,
Hey,
JavaScript,
#1.
Python, Java.
I don't like. I don't like this at all.
Yeah, I mean, I
JavaScript has been consistently at the top. That makes me upset.
yeah, I'm kind of displeased about PHP being above C# as well, but
So why did Objective-C stop being on the list?
I guess people stopped using it.
Well, it's very neat.
Oh yeah, it got replaced by TypeScript right here.
Oh,
Wait, you said Objective-C?
Yeah.
Well, it's
Objective-C is
so niche.
only like,
It's like iOS apps.
yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Not much to market.
Let's see what else. Oh, this is pretty nifty. It's like a more human-like motion of the arm for a robot.
Which they do by slowing it down.
Yeah, it's surprisingly, even though this thing looks horrific, it's surprisingly less disconcerting when it acts more like a person. Even though it's like got these weird, like couch foam sideburn things, and it's dressed in
Generally, humans grab with their fingers and thumb at the same time.
That's not the point. The fact that when it does it fast is just unnerving.
yeah,
And for some reason, slowing it down.
yeah,
makes
slowing it. It's just like less sudden movements, less threat.
Yeah.
So,
That's what they want you to think.
yeah, sure, everyone can sleep easier.
Is that boss music on here?
Pause me of what?
Just keep going.
Okay.
What are you doing?
Oh, this is fun. New guidelines for using AI and machine learning in war. So,
Yeah, I printed out their like 60-page document and read it.
yeah, I mean, like, I don't know a whole lot about this, but my gut feeling is that the same technology that's being used to flag YouTube videos shouldn't be used to kill people. But,
Yeah, the big thing that they stated was they're very, so there's two concepts with using AI in weapons, and one of them is you have humans in the loop, which is they
I like
say
that
whether or
idea.
not- Yeah. Well, having humans in the loop is good because then every action the AI does has to be monitored and has to be approved. And then there's AI on the loop, which is the humans watch over it and check and make sure it doesn't go crazy,
Yeah,
or there's just AI and human not in the loop.
yeah, I don't like
And
that at
one's
all.
scary. And
Yeah.
they said you should always have at least humans on a loop.
Okay, I like that.
Which is why self-writing code is the most horrifying thing I can think of.
Yeah. Okay, I think it's good that they're setting these rules in
Yeah.
place.
Because countries like Russia don't care. They'll just do whatever with AI because it's just going to be faster if you don't have humans interfere.
Yeah, there's some unsettling things in the future. Speaking of unsettling things, coming to a plate near you.
I thought we were leaving the squid behind, Jacob.
The squid?
Squick.
Squick.
Squeamish egg.
Oh, well, this came from a printer.
It's edible.
Yeah.
Will it blend?
Yes, I'm sure it will. I think it's less disconcerting than it seems at first because it's not actually made out of flesh. It's soy proteins and stuff like that. So
Okay.
they're basically just like 3D printing a Boca burger, but I still don't like it, not one bit. Yeah, a lot of unsettling news today.
The carnarian in my soul tells me that it looks weird.
So it looks like artificial intelligence being used to censor the internet and being used to avoid censorship on the internet. So it looks like we have AI versus AI, and I don't know who's going to win, but I want to watch. So
This is like that one video where multiple viruses are interacting in the same environment and they just
Yeah.
who wins.
yeah, this just makes me want to just like set up a virtual machine and put two scripts at odds with each other and just like make the viruses duke it out and see who comes out on top. It could be,
That's
be
what we're going to do with Code Wars.
yeah, that could be a good sport
It's
of
like
the
smart
future.
people- it's like smart people's Beyblade.
And it looks like, surprisingly, they're not already using machine learning to predict the weather. So IBM's going to change that, apparently.
A lot of data.
But,
Well, I think at one point, one of the things is it's a resolution with detail as small as 2 miles wide.
oh, I like it.
So it's what is it, 12 trillion pieces of weather data?
Whoa, that's a lot of data.
Yeah.
Oh man,
Which is pretty cool.
Joey,
throw that through a graphics card.
is it open source data?
So the hurricane will hit by the time it processes all the data.
Well, you just multi-threading. You parallelize everything and
Are they releasing the data?
I don't know.
Because that would be a fun time with R.
Yeah, let's see. 12 trillion piece process forecasts every hour. Yeah, it looks like yeah, and they're going to be using supercomputers for it. Global high resolution atmospheric forecasting. So it looks like IBM is going all in on this. That's pretty exciting. Nice. All right, so what's next? I hear we're going to be talking about JavaScript or something.
I got some news though.
You got some news?
Did you guys see that with Disney Plus, they had like
Disney.
10 million users sign up, and
Dis-
then somebody just like hacked them right away.
Oh, that's terrible.
Can you Google Disney Plus hack?
Yeah.
What to do?
Is there a WikiHow article?
What's that? Did you
Yeah,
Just
the
go to
first one.
that first link right
Yeah.
there.
Is that a Denver post? What is it?
Denver Post? Yeah. Oh my God.
They had
Oh,
so many problems. It's
oh,
crazy.
that's
Wait,
sad.
I'm out of
Hey,
the loop.
hey,
Scroll up.
scroll
How
up.
long has Disney Plus been a thing?
Not super long.
Is it basically just Hulu but for Disney shows?
Yes.
Yeah, it's been for like a week.
Like took you to their main page.
Oh God.
A week and they're already getting sniped? Come on.
That's why I like to call it 0 day.
But this is like day 7.
No, it's not John Moore.
And Washington Post.
I know what it's day
Yeah.
0 hack.
Washington Post was
Sold for as little as $3 per account. Wow, that's
But see, some people prepaid for like a whole year or whatever, another
Yeah.
lockdown can't get in.
Ah.
It's hilarious.
I mean, it kind of breaks my heart that it's worth that little. I mean, I guess it makes sense, but
I mean,
That's awesome. Get wrecked.
the video's not gonna get copyright stricken with the Disney logo.
Oh jeez.
oh no, okay, don't.
You know where we have 2 of the 4 things to be a Twitch affiliate.
Oh, do we?
Yeah.
What?
To be a Twitch affiliate, you have to do so many things. Our account that's streaming right now actually has 2 of the 4 requirements.
Which are what?
You have to have enough followers, which we don't. We have like half as many as we need. We have an average view count over 2 viewers.
Oh boy, this is gonna make a tunnel.
And
I like it.
then
How far
what
will
else
it go?
is there? And
You need to have a chance of success that's constant.
yeah. Oh, you need to stream so many hours a month, and we don't do that because we only do like 2 meetings.
Right.
I think
It's
there's
like
a 4th
tunneling
one.
exactly at the rate of the
Actually, I
delay.
think we do have enough followers.
No, well, that seems like it.
Or maybe it's total number of views, which we have. Are you done yet, buddy?
No. Okay, I'm done
Wanna
now.
take it away, Nick?
Sure. I gotta fix this mess now.
Teach us how to not program, Nick.
I'm gonna preface this by saying I'm not an expert in JavaScript, so if anybody would like to chime in and say anything about it, feel free.
I know some things about JavaScript. I would also not describe myself as an
Oh,
expert.
boy.
But
Is
Same.
anybody really an expert in JavaScript?
yeah, I mean, I'm good enough to make web apps. So
I mean,
Wait,
the
going
experts
this
are
way?
just
What
the
are you
ones who have to
doing right
Google
now?
significantly less than the
Are
others.
I
you
don't know.
failing at Windows?
I am failing at Windows.
oh wow, it's utter chaos.
Is that stream recursion?
Yeah, you might want to turn off the stream.
What? Turn off the
Might
stream?
Yeah, go back to Discord,
Yeah, we don't want to crash the Twitch servers.
and then,
Actually.
close out of Twitch
Yeah, it's just
tab, because it would have the audio running.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Doesn't send you every layer.
Oh, that's true.
All right. So we're gonna talk about some JavaScript today.
JavaScript, oh boy.
Yeah.
This is weird.
Right? It was actually a template I found, and it actually came out like super good. So.
React the thing where like you can export JavaScript to mobile apps.
So there's 2 different things. So there's, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but there's React, which is for web development, and then there's React Native,
Oh,
which is for mobile development.
Cool.
So just a little bit of history. So it was originally sort of created by this guy named Brendan in 1995, who actually ended up being the co-founder of Mozilla, the creator of my favorite browser, the best browser, the most superior browser, but we're not going to go there. So there's like this analogy out there that JavaScript is to Java as Visual Basic is to C++. I completely don't agree with that, but I thought that was kind of an interesting point to put in here.
Also, analogy slightly lost. What is Visual Basic? Just very briefly.
What is Visual Basic? I really don't know how to describe what Visual Basic is.
Python.
Oh, okay, I get you.
It's used in a lot of the Microsoft stuff, so it's
Yeah.
part of the .NET Core.
Mhm.
But you can write like in Excel, you can do programming in Excel, and same with like Word. And when you do that, you write in Visual Basic.
Except what you do in Excel is like the old Visual Basic, like straight out of the 90s. And that's why it's horrible.
It's like beginner's programming language for 90s kids.
So anyways, he created in 1995. Microsoft adopted their own sort of version in 1996. And then as we have moved forward, new things have come about, like using asynchronous JavaScript code, also referred to as AJAX. But anyways, what is JavaScript? So it's an interpreted scripting language. It's dynamically typed, and it supports event-driven, functional, and object-oriented programming. I know, Joey, functional programming. So I also have this link here because this is pretty interesting. So there are so many JavaScript libraries. If you go to npm and just search JavaScript, 54,000 packages come up.
Oh, buddy.
There's like a drinking game where somebody names something and you look up to see if it's a JavaScript package or not, and they have to take a drink because it's pretty crazy. But anyways, so I believe the chart that you guys pulled up from the news was from this. This is actually a study that Stack Overflow did on all of the developers that use their site. They sent out a survey, and they gathered a bunch of data about the type of people who use Stack Overflow and the languages they type in and everything. And so it's just sort of interesting. If you come down, most popular technologies for programming, scripting, and markup languages, of course, JavaScript at the top, along with HTML, CSS, and SQL. And the reason being because web development is a very vast portion of programming. Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily the future, but there's so much web development going on that it definitely takes its place at the top as far as popularity goes.
But I mean, it's the ultimate software compatibility medium, isn't it? Every modern operating system has a web browser nowadays, so everything can essentially run JavaScript and the whole works.
That is correct, yes. And if you plan on doing really any mobile development, JavaScript is usually involved somewhere along the line. So why do we care? Well, approximately 95% of all web pages use JavaScript in some fashion, mostly on the front end, but there is some back end stuff. So if you're familiar with Angular, which is a whole JavaScript framework for web development.
Did you forget about Discord?
Did I forget about Discord?
It's run.
What?
No, forget about Discord as in like all these things, but not Discord.
I mean, maybe Discord belongs there, but I just have a small list here. But anyway, so the web pages, it's good for cross-platform mobile app development. So React, we can create one UI that both iOS can break down into its native UI elements and Android can break down into its native UI elements. Anybody who's tried to do cross-platform application development before would know that that's probably the biggest pain in the butt, is trying to deal with all of the weird UI differences between the two. It's also good for things called progressive web applications. So these are websites that you could actually download onto your phone and run as a application, but it's really just a web app, which is kind of cool. So these are just a couple big applications that run off JavaScript, so Slack, GitHub, Skype, etc. Let's see, other uses, rendering and animation, virtual reality, all sorts of stuff. So I'm just going to kind of run through a couple demos of what JavaScript looks like in case you haven't seen it before. But the first is kind of a cool one. It has to do with animation with JavaScript. So in this one, we're actually going to load a web page where we actually draw on a canvas. So do that real quick. It's the best way to do this. Can we...
2 cubed over r squared, my boy.
There we go. So I don't know if I
You
can...
use the Windows key and arrows to split screen if you wanted.
No, that's all right. That's pretty cool. So this is taking some images and animating them across the screen here. So wait, how do you do it? Windows key, arrow? Oh, sick. Okay. So if I do Windows key, aha, nice. I know I haven't Windowsed in a while. Not gonna lie. For better or worse. Actually, that's probably really small though, isn't it?
It's okay.
So anyways, I didn't write this code. I did find this online. I don't know a ton about the actual animation, but this is a fairly popular thing. So just to kind of quickly go through the code a little bit, there's a few images there. So you see those variables sun.source, moon.source, and earth.source. Those are bringing in just some images from the internet. And then there's a draw function that gets called, and it starts by getting a canvas. So in HTML, you can actually create a canvas. There's such thing as canvas tags, which are right here, where you can define a certain area by width or height that you can use as a canvas.
What is a canvas?
So a canvas, in this case, is just somewhere where we're going to be doing drawing. I don't really know what the formal definition of the canvas HTML tag is, but typically when you see that, you're using JavaScript to usually animate something on that canvas.
Oh,
So if you were to go to a website and do like 2048 online, that whole board is probably a canvas. All those elements are moving around on that canvas, more than likely.
so you have to make the function be in line with the page, or can you define it in a separate file?
So yes, you can define it in a separate file if you want to.
Okay.
It depends on the type of project you're running, but in this case, I just am creating an HTML document that's fairly basic. So you can have Java dependencies that aren't necessarily written in line like this. So for example, if you use think for a second. If you use something like jQuery, so jQuery is a special JavaScript library that I am going to talk about in a little bit, but essentially you can sort of just import that into your web application project and just start referring to that code. So that's obviously not written in your HTML file, but you can still utilize that code. So no, it doesn't have to be written here. I guess that'd be the best way to explain it.
Okay. Yeah.
But anyways, so this is just one kind of cool thing you can do with it. This isn't the most typical thing that you see though. So the most typical thing you see is what we're going to look at next. So I believe I go straight into that, yeah. So something like this is what you would more typically see with just JavaScript on a page. This is the most basic form of JavaScript is like form validation, for example. So anybody here has probably signed up for an account somewhere, and when they went to the box that said verify password and it didn't match the other one, it told you that your passwords don't match, or you went to log in and it told you the login was wrong. There's some sort of validation going on in the background where your JavaScript is checking the data that you typed into your text boxes on your web page. So in this case, this code here is looking at this text box and seeing that there's no data filled out and then alerting me. So real quick with code-wise.
The idea that JavaScript is handling sensitive information every day by the millions of bits of data, or by the millions of pieces of data, that scares me a little.
Well, you would probably expect a lot of the personal information not to be handled on the actual web page. So what we're looking at here right now is all just JavaScript on the front end. Okay, so if we were to use what I mentioned before, which was asynchronous JavaScript, so AJAX, we can actually use AJAX to make calls to our backend. So if we wanted, we could do all of the validation of the personal information on a server somewhere, not on the page here. And that actually gets into some deeper topics of things like SQL injection and taking advantage of weaknesses in the page itself. But if we start moving that away from the front end, we can that is one way we can sort of alleviate that issue. But the code here, let's see, so if we come down here, has everyone here seen just regular HTML before?
I have.
Okay, so obviously just a typical HTML page. So in our body, there's the heading there and a form. So I'm just using the regular form tags here, and it has a text input and a submit button here.
Forgive me, but what other doc type tags are there?
What other doc type?
At line 1, there's something that says doc type HTML.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's like one for XML and stuff. No.
Okay.
I think usually you only type in doc type HTML, but like if you're using like an old version of HTML, then you specify that version, but this is just the standard one for HTML5 that most websites after like 2012 or whenever they switched over to HTML5 use, but back in the old days, you'd like specify which type of HTML you're using and all of that.
Yeah. Honestly, like in a lot of cases, you really don't even see that there. If I were to remove that entirely, it would run the same.
So it's just a case of old habits die hard.
Sure. I buy that.
I admire that for a dollar.
But anyway, so the JavaScript written here, when you write JavaScript on an HTML, in an HTML document, you enclose it in the script tags. So when the HTML sees script tags, you define what type of script you're writing. So in this case, there's a type here, type of JavaScript, text/JavaScript is the way of defining that. And so everything between the opening and closing tag there is all going to be just rendered as regular JavaScript code. So in this case, there's a function called validate form, which is grabbing the element on my page and getting the value here. And it's just assigning it to this variable x and just seeing if there is nothing filled into the box. If we actually go down to the regular form here, so this is regular HTML code. So on submit, so when I actually hit the submit button, it's going to return the result from the form validation. And so that means that function is going to be called when I hit the submit button. So again, this is a more typical way you would see JavaScript working. HTML and CSS is all of the visuals, but it won't do anything past that. It won't deal with values and text boxes, radio buttons, checkboxes, sliders, anything else you might see on a web page. If you use any type of form on a web page at all, it'll be JavaScript handling that data. And then depending on what you're using as your web page framework, it will process that and send that off as such. So
and usually the sending off would take place through like HTTPS or some other non-JavaScript protocol. So at that point, it's out of JavaScript's hands, so that you don't have to be concerned, as John was saying, about JavaScript being in charge of millions and millions of people's personal data.
Right, that has to do with not handling that on the page, but moving it off the page.
Oh, okay, now I'm less scared.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
the JavaScript all just runs on the machine that has the web browser of the person using it. All of the stuff that's happening on the web server, you can do that in any language pretty much.
Oh, okay.
So another reason you would want to be careful having personal information on your page, on your view, is what it's more commonly referred to as, is if you go to any web page and press F12 for developer tools, you can see all of the sort of UI code there, so the HTML, the CSS.
Basically the instance running on the browser.
Yeah, and so you don't want there to be any plain text of information that you have entered in. You want that all to leave the page. So
send the database of usernames and passwords over to the user's machine and process it there and then send it back.
yeah, exactly.
Not a good idea.
Send it to China.
Common. All employees only do things with passwords.
So you can self-modifying code.
Oh yeah, there's one more.
Suck in this happy.
So that's so what you just saw is a pretty typical thing you would see with JavaScript. Again, is form validation and things like that.
You're
Some
joking.
what was that?
Disclaimer, that stuff from earlier, like 5 seconds ago, we were joking.
It's all good, man. So the third demo I'm going to show you is sort of the point of special libraries like React and framework like Angular, is this idea of, well, if I can do all of this interacting with HTML with JavaScript, and I don't really know HTML, it can be kind of weird sometimes with the grouping, and it makes more sense, makes more sense to me when I write JavaScript. Why don't I just write the entire page in JavaScript? So this is going to look pretty ugly because this is literally just vanilla JavaScript, so to speak. There's no special packages here. But what we're going to be doing now is just writing a web page, a very simple web page with a text box and a heading and nothing else, but just completely in JavaScript. So again, I know it's not the most interesting example, but I got all this JavaScript code over here. So again, all within the script tags. You notice when I actually write this code, there's nothing in my body whatsoever. So in JavaScript, there is an onload function built in to the window that I can actually define so that when I load up my view, this code's going to run by default in case there's any preliminary changes I need to make to a page. Go ahead.
And also putting stuff in there, make sure that the entire web page loads before you start running JavaScript and things get glitchy and weird and start putting boxes in places where boxes shouldn't be.
That is very true. Yeah, if you run JavaScript code before your page is loaded.
Especially because everyone likes to put their JavaScript code at the top of the page.
Mhm.
And if you put everything in the onload function, then it makes sure the entire page is loaded before that code is executed.
Right. Yeah, so actually this is a terrible example because I put the body tags below it. But it was more so because I wrote the script and I'm like, oh, let me put the body tags in to show there's nothing here. And then,
But you have everything in the onload function, so it's still
Right.
gotta wait for the page to load.
What was I going to say? Oh, so an example of why I might need to run JavaScript when the page loads is, let's say I have a website and then somebody just logged in and went to their profile page. I have a generic view for every profile, but when Joey logs in, the name at the top is going to say hello Joey or whatever, and I'm going to fill that in at runtime when I load that page and I got that user info.
So wait, a function is an object type?
Function is an object type. So this is where you have to kind of rewind and know that JavaScript supports like functional and event driving and object oriented, so you can kind of like craft the code in different ways. And I think you'll see what I mean when you see the React stuff, because that's when it gets kind of goofy too. But anyways, so I can use built-in functions like create element and define an HTML tag to just create something. You use the same type of structure that HTML does, which is this idea of nesting tags inside of other tags. In JavaScript, they use the verbiage of append child. So in this case, we're appending that heading, which is an H2 tag, to the body, which would be the parent in this case. So it uses that parent-child relationship. And you can also, from the onload function, call some other functions that you might write. In this case, I just create this other random function where I create a text box and then append that also to the body. So again, this doesn't really do anything, but it kind of drives the point across where we can start moving away from actually writing any HTML at all. Now, if you've ever worked with more serious web development, we use something called Bootstrap. Bootstrap being a bunch of pre-written style sheets for you, so you're not going and writing CSS from scratch because nobody wants to do that. If you've ever tried to center stuff in the page and make stuff like align right and all that crap ever in your life, then you know what I'm talking about.
I'm having flashbacks.
The great thing about Bootstrap is it makes everything into a grid. So you can like put everything in rows and columns depending on where you want it to be on the page, and also specify like which column should be somewhere when someone's using a tablet or a computer or a phone, so that it makes it much more streamlined.
Right. Yeah, Bootstrap is the way to go. And anyways, just wanted to make that point because as you see here, I can set style attributes in line like this, just like I could with HTML, but I could also just as easily just assign an ID or a class to a particular element that I create, and then it'll just refer to Bootstrap for all the styling.
Is this feature of JavaScript where you can just inline JavaScript into a blank HTML file, is this like a natural feature of JavaScript?
Yeah, if I have an HTML page and I create a script tag and I say that this is JavaScript code, I can write just plain JavaScript code. Now, if I wanted to do things that required a library or something, I would need to have some extra packages, but you could go into Notepad right now and just create some HTML tags, create a script tag, write some JavaScript in there, and that would go run on the browser.
Okay.
Nothing special is required here at all.
Are there any fancy IDs for this sort of thing, or is that like one of the caveats?
So actually, that's a really good point. So there are probably some IDEs that are better and some that are worse. I couldn't say that. My experience has been mainly Visual Studio, and I have found that Visual Studio is really not that good at figuring out JavaScript syntax, depending on the type of project you have open. Here, VS Code seems to do a pretty decent job. If you open up like a C# .NET web application, like an ASP, .NET Core or something, and you try to write JavaScript, because for whatever reason it does not work very well. Like it's pretty bad. But I really can't speak to what's better or worse.
Are you sure
But
it's not just JavaScript not working very well?
I'm pretty sure that's just the IntelliSense that kind of fails, because if you write, this is kind of going beyond the scope here, but if you do like a C# web application, you not only have your HTML, but you also have something called razor syntax, where you like inject bits of C# code into the view, and there's like a lot of stuff going on your page. So I'm kind of thinking that's probably a little bit of the reason.
So what I'm hearing is wizardry.
Yes, it's a black box that for some reason works, and you just accept that it works.
Is this what being a web dev is like?
Yes.
Oh God.
Just right now, look up razor syntax. Oh, here, I'll do it right now. All right,
No,
I know we're taking a major sidetrack here.
I don't want to sidetrack you too hard.
I can't type.
MVC inside your MVC.
So basically, you can just write an @ sign in your HTML code, and after the @ sign, like right here, here's an H2 tag. I have an @ sign, and after that, it's interpreted as C# code. So I have a datetime object.
That's
So is this just like a C# templating system to auto-generate your HTML on the server?
So what this is when somebody requests the view, before it returns the view, it's running functions in a C# backend and returning it to the view and then displaying it to you. So it's actually
It's like a whole
just
stack.
another way of populating the page with data.
It's like a whole stack of JavaScript connected to C# and back and
Mhm.
forth.
It's actually very cool, and I recommend just messing with it a little bit.
You know, normally I'd complain or take a stab at JavaScript, but that's actually pretty cool.
It is pretty sweet. So if you have like in your back end, let's say you make like an API call or something, and you get back like this giant object full of data, you can literally just pass that straight to the front end, and then just have C# code that does like what this is doing, and just takes an object and then refers to a certain either variable or function within it, and you don't really have to do any other processing, which is kind of sweet.
Can I do like multiple things in the same block, and I'm just calling the same block of C# code?
You can open up brackets and literally do as much code as you want.
Oh, cool! I can just surround the entire program in it.
You're limited by scope a little bit,
Wow.
so remember that piece. But as long as what you're accessing you've specified that you want to pass that to the view, then you can literally do whatever you want.
So variables inside one app block aren't going to be accessible by another app block, is what I'm hearing.
No. Yes and no. We can talk later about that. Back to where we're going here.
I was just curious, sorry.
So when you talk about JavaScript, you're really never using vanilla JavaScript in most cases. You're usually using some extra package, some extra library, something. A lot of cases, as far as web development goes, you're going to use something called jQuery, which has this idea of writing less and doing more. So there's functions in there. Go ahead.
Yeah, basically like makes everything a lot more concise, because vanilla JavaScript has like a lot of very long function names in its library, and it kind of like repurposes it to be more programmer friendly.
Exactly.
It sounds like these libraries just make JavaScript into an actual programming language.
Basically. A good example of that is, as you saw when I was making that really basic web page that literally just had a heading and a text box, I had to use very large function names like document, create element, append child, all this stuff. It makes it a lot easier to access elements on the page and manipulate them.
Or you just make a $sign.
Yeah.
And that's your.
We can look at some examples of jQuery code in a little bit. So anyways, React is a JavaScript that is not actually right. React is not a framework. React, I don't know why I wrote that. So React is specifically just a JavaScript library for UI. Then there's the native version of React, where you can write UI elements in this React JavaScript that the devices will translate into their native UI elements for you. So you can write one UI for the most part for iOS and Android. And if you want, you can kind of specify specific things like if it's iOS or if it's Android, do this. But for the other 99% of your user interface, it's all just one set of code. So that's pretty convenient. So, okay. Yeah, off the framework thing. So Angular is a JavaScript framework that you can actually do more than what you can with React. It's not just, specific to the front end stuff. And okay, so we're actually gonna try doing some of this. So if you go to this link, this is pretty cool. Snack.expo.io. So what happens is you load this up and it creates a sample application in React for you on the browser. And for some reason it's not showing me my preview, which I don't know why.
Oh, do you have to hit run?
No,
Okay.
save maybe. Okay, well let me, I'm not sure. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So it's pretty cool. So this is just a basic example of React. So we're going to start messing with the code in a minute, but the cool part is actually off to the right with the live demo of your applications. You can actually run this on an iOS phone real quick, a phone running iOS. Now they have limited resources, so sometimes like you have to wait in the queue to actually open this up unless you subscribe or whatever. But yeah, so now it's open on an iOS phone. You can do the same thing on Android. Huh?
Looks like actual code. That's
Right?
the sad part.
And then here it is running on an Android phone. So this will update live. So as you make changes, you will see changes on the preview window off to the right. So we are actually gonna
Wait, are we
change a
returning
bunch of
blocks
stuff.
HTML?
What?
Are we returning blocks of HTML in one of our methods?
All right, so this is React Native, so this is actually nothing to do with HTML. This is all,
Oh, okay.
this is taking the very basic example I showed you of let's take HTML out of the equation, just write everything in JavaScript. This is libraries built many, many, many times on top of that to make writing UIs easier and doing it in JavaScript. And again, with the goal of easing up mobile development because it's very difficult to just, if you built an iOS app and said, I want to port this over to Android, it's not easy to necessarily to make those work. You might have to just kind of write it from the ground up again, which is pretty annoying. So famously in cases like, like Facebook, for instance, you want it to look the same across all of your devices. So and actually React was created by Facebook, so that was a good example. Go ahead.
That's a question. So the stuff in the middle that looks like HTML, that's just a React component and it has a similar syntax.
Yeah, so this is actually, I think I have
Oh, okay.
did I have a slide about this at the end or something? No, I didn't. I really should have done that. That's fine.
Sorry for the constant interruptions, by the way.
You're good. Don't worry about it. So this is actually written in something called JSM. It's what they actually call the syntax. It's like a markup language in JavaScript, essentially. I know it sounds kind of goofy, but yeah. So it is sort of a tag system similar to HTML. So you're going to have the same properties of nesting tags within tags and things like that you would see, and that's fairly standard across all of mobile development. You're going to see that if you do Android development, you're using a lot of XML, and same with iOS. I'm not sure like if you do Objective-C, I'm not sure if it's XML or what they use over there exactly, but
It's just like a characteristic of markup languages to have that type of syntax.
Yeah.
It's like same as programming languages have like curly braces and all of that.
So
Exactly.
It's a markup language which is typically embedded in JavaScript. Is that what you're saying?
wait, say that again?
Is it a markup language that's typically embedded in JavaScript, or am I missing the picture?
We're just talking about markup languages in general. This just happens to be something called JSM, which is a markup language that is sort of JavaScript based, for
Okay.
lack of a better term for that. So just a quick overview of the way this project works and the way that React works in general is it's this idea of you create components and then you have your main file, app.js, where you load all of your components in and display them. So they did a pretty good example of that here. And actually everybody who loads this up is going to get the same demo project, so you can kind of follow along with this. But you're going to notice in this return block here, you create a view. So you have view tags. Within your view, they create some text here. They create styles at the bottom, which you can actually write in plain CSS, which is cool, or you could import in pre-written CSS as you would on web with Bootstrap. So you can actually import that in, but they just define some examples here and assign that style here. And they also showed an example of creating a card, which is what this looks like. It's a pretty common element that you would see on a mobile app. And they showed an example of just using a component rather than defining actual text and things on our main document here. So just to give you an idea of what that component looks like, if you go over to components, you'll see that here. You'll see that we imported that at the top. So if we go to the actual file, it's very similar. They just created a view with some text and an image. And this export means we're going to render and export all of that as a result of using this component. So
This actually looks frighteningly simple.
it's simple, but it gets complicated really quick. I will say
Right,
that.
it's arbitrary constants and arbitrary libraries.
Well, you'll see. We'll do something with this in just a second. So anyway, so after I import my component, I can just throw this in with a tag, and everything that I wrote in that component will just get thrown in right here. So this is really, really good for modeling different views on your application because it allows you to really divide the code up and write things individually in their own files, depending on how organized you want to be. But that is recommended to do that. So what I'm gonna have you do is we're gonna make, I guess I have to,
So wait, is asset example a class or an object?
say it again?
Is asset example a class or an object?
So asset example, I guess for lack of a better phrase here, I will call it an object. Yes, so this would be like, it's not really an object though.
It's a thing.
So I will say that if you start looking up React, the terminology gets kind of strange because again, you're talking about taking JavaScript and writing, you've written like several layers on top of that. And then you got like markup language inside of your JavaScript, and you got these weird like export default class. So actually, I guess it would be a class because I guess you could call it a class.
And then I could embed this all in HTML theoretically?
Yes, so that's why if you go over to the example, I can run this as a web application. Yeah, because this is still React, yes, but
So I could still, logistically speaking, embed a markup language inside another markup language.
sure.
I'm not sure if I like this anymore.
No, you don't want to do that. So we'll leave it at that. But yes, because we're actually importing React and React Native both here, these elements, some of these elements actually do exist across the libraries. So a view and a text and an image and a card all exist across React and React Native libraries. Obviously, React Native is going to have stuff that's specific to mobile, but because these aren't specific, you can load them in web too. So with this particular application, what's very interesting is you could write one UI that works as a web page and a cross-platform mobile application, which is pretty powerful. Saves a lot of time.
So how much mobile app development these days would you say is done in React Native? How
much in React Native?
Like what portion?
Honestly, not as much as you'd think. It's pretty well. The JavaScript libraries are pretty well split, so you see a lot of Angular stuff too. And then there's also Microsoft's version of this, which is called Xamarin, which is not JavaScript, but it's doing. Well, I'll let Joey attest to this.
No, I haven't done that much, but I just remember it being very similar to all the other stuff, just it's on the .NET.
Yeah, so essentially what Xamarin is doing is they are doing the exact same thing where you write a front end, but it's in C#.
Huh.
And yes, you do have like weird like XML and other things mixed in there to arrange your UI, but it's the same goal of one way of doing it that can break down onto the individual devices and you're only writing it one time is the goal.
Just be exported to all the different platforms without having to like write an app for Android and then rewrite it for iOS.
Exactly. So I'm actually going to log into this real quick and just open up one of these that I made, and I'm going to help you guys through. Why log in? There it is.
I'm not sure if I feel scared.
Not sure if you feel scared. Why would you feel scared?
Because this seems like a good language, except for the fact that it's in JavaScript.
Error occurred. Oh, probably because I'm logged in over here. Is that why?
Did you type the right password?
I'm pretty sure I did.
Make sure you say the right password.
Oh, that's why. I forgot that didn't actually use my whole last name. So yeah, we'll just give Joey my password, no big deal.
Stonks.
So I just made this where I basically kept a lot of the same code, but I added some other stuff to create something with a text box, a button, and still use some of the elements they had. So I'm just going to kind of go through, and you guys are welcome to change things and follow along, but I'm going to talk about first up at the top here what they have imported. Actually, real quick, I do want to show you something really cool that if you also want to try, you can download the Expo app on your phone. And so if you click Run Your Device, you can actually sign into your account and then open this from your device, or you can actually take a picture of this QR code with the app and then just run the app on your phone, which is pretty sweet. So that's like a super cool feature of this, not gonna lie. And there is a command line version of this, Joey, where you can do all of this, and then from command line, if you say run, and depending on what you have set as your default settings for debugging, it'll actually just display a QR code right there in like the command line, and you can just take a picture, or you can have it. You can email it to the phone or whatever you want to do.
This is kind of a long
This
shot,
app-
but will it
this-
render the preview in ASCII?
I don't
Just
know.
open in links, man. Is that
like
specific for this website, this Snack Expo?
So Snack Expo is their product for just writing stuff on the browser. They actually have a whole like framework that you can download. So there's a command line interface for it, and it's actually pretty cool. So that's like if you want to do actual development, not just in the browser like this.
Now he says
And it's what?
nothing.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's all just like NuGet package stuff, where you can just do like npm install Expo CLI or whatever. So you'll have to look it up, but it's pretty sweet. So anyways, just to kind of go through the code. So first they're doing some import statements here. So as I mentioned before, there is a React and a React Native library. Up at the top, they're just importing star, which is everything from the React library. Why you would do that, I really don't know. But then from the React Native library, we're just taking a few things that we're using here in this particular document: the text, tags, the view, style sheet, text input button, and then the constants. That is, where is that at? Oh, yeah, down here. So this is cool. So they have constants built in so that if you're dealing with phones and stuff, they'll already have like a constant for like the status bar height. I think there's actually specific ones for iOS and Android if you want, but That's like a default thing that's written for you so that you don't have to go up and look up, well, how many pixels tall is the status bar in an iPhone? When you're dealing with these views and things, and this is, again, across mobile development, that status bar is actually floating on the device, so you can actually put stuff behind it, which is a pain, yeah. But that's, just how the system works. So then these imports, so these are importing from our components. So I created a new component called sign up, which is the component you see here with the text box and the button. So we'll get to that in a minute. And then this is just some other library, React Native paper, that is where the card is coming from, that you see there. So they have that probably over here in the package JSON file. Yep. So these are your dependencies that you stick in a JSON file. Now, a real project is going to have a lot more dependencies, but this is just, again, a pretty basic example. So then you have this export default class app extends React component thing. So you have this app class. This is just your main application code right here, and it's extending React component because, yes, your whole view, your whole application, since again this is all just the UI, is still a big component. So that's why it's extending from component there. And export, because from what I understand, even the main application is going to be exported and will be broken down by the native device into its subsequent UI features. So iPhone will generate its version of a button, and Android will generate its version. And you'll see that if you run iOS or Android in the demo over there, you'll see it looks different because, again, it's broken down into what's native to that device. And then render, just because you're rendering your component, so all of the code within that render function there is going to be what is displayed. And I believe you can do some additional calculations and things above that, and your return is what you actually return there. So in this case, we have a big view tag there. And again, like I said, with the styles, you can define it as regular CSS or load in some dependency that writes this stuff for you. But they had written a container and a paragraph and a card. Actually, I think I wrote the card one. That wasn't there before, but so we can stick those styles in there. I have a text tag, so this is for our welcome to ACM header on the application here. Then I create a card and put the asset example code in, which we'll get to in a minute, and another card for the sign up. So this I pretty much left just about the same from what they had, except I changed the image and changed where the text was. So again, because we're in a new document here, we need to import those same dependencies here. Import those same, what's the word I'm looking for here? Tongue-tied. Libraries, I guess, for text view, style sheet, and all that good stuff. And again, needs that export function, needs to extend the React component class, and you will return a view with an image and some text in there. And then I also have the sign up component. So it's just a little bit more interesting. So again, all of the same stuff, but then I have the text input and button. So similar to what you would see in HTML is you can add attributes right there within the tags. So obviously we have the style attribute, which we've seen. There's also the placeholder attribute. I've found that the documentation on this stuff is pretty good. The only thing as far as actually doing this is you run into people doing things differently. So some people will actually create functions that will go change all of this stuff. Some people will do it in line, and sometimes it's a little bit confusing when you're looking up how to do something specific. Is some people will have completely structured the file 100% differently and not do things the same. So I know.
I can just imagine.
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
short aside, could you please pull up the Android thing and like export the QR code?
Oh yeah. So like run on your device.
Music?
Do you have the Expo app now?
Yep, I do.
Okay. You might have to get closer on that.
Zoom and then open it notices.
That's pretty cool. I think Visual Studio used to have a very similar thing for, I think it was for XML, or just, I can't, it might have been full Xamarin stuff, but essentially, yeah, it was like a
Skunks.
QR code, and it was just like, yeah, it just loads
he's
it
got
up, and you're like, oh, this is kind of cool.
Well, traditionally, all right, when you do development and you want like a simulator for your thing or
Sure.
whatever, if you back up a step, if you're doing mobile development and you would like to debug on a device, you have a couple options. You can plug your device in, and a lot of times you got to download like the right, what do you call it? Firmware, not firmware. Help me out here. What word am I looking
Describing
for?
it,
Like
IDE kind of thing?
no. Like when you plug a device in, it needs to update your.
Operating system, OS.
Is it firmware? Is that the word I'm using? Looking for?
Orange, probably good too.
Okay, so you got to upgrade your.
Buzzwords I hear flying around. I know nothing about this stuff.
So you have to update your firmware, or maybe it's you have the wrong version of it, and you got to go find it. Or your device is not your computer doesn't recognize the device or whatever. Your other option is to driver. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Or you are on a Windows laptop and you can't run an iOS simulator from that because you need Xcode, which is Apple's sort of development IDE, which is terrible, but we're not going to get into that. Or if you're on specifically Windows is where you run into that issue. And so this is a lot easier. You can just use a phone that you have, or a friend comes over, takes a picture of this, can debug it, whatever, on their device. It's a lot more seamless and easier to do, in my opinion.
Yep.
And the fact that you can also do that from the command line too is pretty sweet.
That scares me. I cannot stress that enough. It frightens me.
I at one point had an issue with the QR code, so I just changed method to email. So it would just email it. So you'd go into your email, and then there was the link, and you just clicked it and opened the app up. It was like, all right, this is sweet. But anyway, so that is what React looks like. Now, obviously, this isn't the full picture here. If I were creating a mobile application, I'm going to need more than a UI. You can do it in the back end of your choice. Some are more complicated to communicate with React than others, and I found this really cool site. Where are you at? Actually, it might have been on my iPad. All right, I'll throw it in the Discord later, but there's a really cool site that literally has nearly every backend product, from like the databases and like serverless and non-serverless, like all this different stuff, and all the different like RESTful stuff. And it's very interesting. It's like all on one page, and you can read about it all. Because there's a lot of different options. Again, this is truly just the front end. But yeah, so this is sort of the direction that, and the reason that JavaScript is continuing to be very popular is because now it's so, it's been around for so long, and now we have really cool stuff like this, and it's kind of expanded into pretty much all areas of development because of. Go ahead.
People make interpreted languages inside interpreted languages.
Yeah, sure. But anyways, does anyone have any questions? I don't know how good of an explanation all of that was, because I am not an expert in this by any means, but it is pretty cool stuff.
No. I guess if this is all the front end, what's like an example of what would the front end, like what stuff do you have to add to start connecting to a back end?
Start connecting
very
to.
specific for each back end.
Well, let me let me grab that link and pull up that page.
Or yeah, anything like what does it kind of look like? Because I've done very little, and the little I did, I don't remember.
Like a call response type of thing, like
Yeah, that would make sense. Yes.
like it sends a request to the sends a request to the server, waits for a response, and then it adds like a function that runs when it gets a response.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That was terrible. Okay.
Well, Oh, that's a long web.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
Oh, wow.
So they talk a little bit first about virtual reality, text editors, then they go into databases, your mobile app backend as a service, monitoring performance, continuous deployment, authorization. Because again, React is just a user interface. So you're going to want to use some sort of service that's going to authorize logins. So OAuth, I know just from the web development side, is pretty popular. All the stuff, testing, push notifications. So one interesting thing about React is that while it is considered React Native, it's not fully native. So it's sort of an interesting, that's sort of an interesting aspect. If you write in Objective-C or in Java for Android, you do have direct access from anywhere in your code to the operating system. Or different elements of the operating system. So vibrate, accelerometer, speaker, microphone, whatever. You don't necessarily have that with React. And because some of these backends aren't actually on the device itself, then you don't really have it there either. So, push notifications, for instance, you might use a service for that. So let me keep going here. So yeah, here's just some examples of databases, backends. So Firebase, I've heard, is pretty popular. So sort of interesting. Backend, that's hilarious.
Wait, there's a language called backend?
Yeah.
Is it framework?
So again, since React isn't a framework, if you were writing in something that is a framework, so like as far as I know, I believe Xamarin is a framework. So you would write your C# code for the front end that would work on both Android and iOS. Then in that Xamarin project, you would have an iOS and an Android project so that you would be able to process things slightly differently, because accessing the things that I just mentioned, like microphone, speaker, accelerometer, things like that, it's going to be different across those devices. So you would need to write separate code for that. So that would be more of a framework because it's all encompassing. React is not, it's just the UI. So a lot of these things are sort of like off device processing for like your back end code. Could you possibly pair it with like C# or Objective-C or Java? Yes. I honestly have not fully made a React Native app or anything, so I don't know. It's kind of in my plans over winter break to actually create something, but I would do some research on the back end stuff, because that's, at least for me, is where I start to kind of lose grasp of how all of that works. It's a very different approach to mobile development from just traditional, I'm going to write some Java in Android Studio, where I have the entire project there from back end to front end, XML. I have the icons for the application on the desktop, the icons for in the store, and all that stuff. And then I literally am just going to build that project and install it on a phone and run it. It's not the same structure. So I guess if there was a takeaway from this, it's the cross-platform and the ability to make that easily over into a web app, so you have something that matches all across. Twitter, Facebook, dating apps like Tinder and stuff, they've all been using this for years. That's why no matter where you log in, it all looks the same.
What's the basic difference between a front end and a back end?
Well, that's a good question. So to clear that up, so your front end is specifically your user interface. So if you're talking about what? Are you want to get up there again?
It's typically the blips and blobs that appear on the screen.
So this is across the board to mobile development, web development, everything. If you're talking about front end, you're talking about specifically the user interface. So if in terms of web development, you're talking about HTML, your CSS, your JavaScript on your view is usually the terminology we used. Your backend would be, you can build backends in many different ways, but your backend would usually be what's pulling data from your database and sending it to your view, or in the case of like logging in, you have something in the backend that's going to verify your login information. It's going to be more of the data side of things.
So in short, the front end is the code that runs on the user's computer. The back end is the code that runs on the server that the user's computer is communicating with.
In web development, yes. If you're talking about like mobile development, that's not always the case. The back end might actually be on the device too. I mean, it just kind of depends on also the type of project we're talking about too. So, like if you were to write, so if you were to write an Android application, and you were to do that just in Android Studio, you're just writing it in Java, the line kind of gets a little hairy just because, yes, you do all of the front end stuff in there, but you can also do a lot of data processing and a lot of interfacing with the components on the device and everything kind of behind the scenes. And then, yes, there would be stuff probably off the device depending on if you have an online or an offline application, but yeah.
Just
But-
kind of gets blurred a little bit when.
Yeah, and that's why, like, for me personally, because I don't have the enough experience, that's why, like, as far as writing a backend for my React app, I don't quite know all the details of that. But from a web application standpoint, yeah, your backend's on a server somewhere, and you're being fed a view from your from that server that you're accessing.
Nice. Wow. Okay. I learned a lot because I didn't know any of this stuff. I just worked for one summer and I had no idea what I was doing. So, learned a bunch. Thank you, Nick.
You're welcome.